So I want to talk about some personality traits today, and these particular personality traits can be particularly harmful to you if you're going into IT. Now, before I start, I want to let you know these are all things that all of us have to some degree, so don't find yourself thinking, oh my gosh, I have all of these, I'm terrible. Honestly, all of us exhibit all of these to some degree. And also, just because you're really bad about one does not mean that you're not cut out for IT. I am particularly bad about one of these, and I'm going to talk about it. So let's start with the first one, and that's risk aversion. Risk aversion basically means that you're afraid to take risks. Now, some risks are risks that you shouldn't take, but we'll get to that in a second. Now, being risk averse is a problem in your career for several reasons. The main one being in IT, you're going to have to take risks. One example is learning something new, especially once you're in your career. If you are not willing to take that risk and learn something new, then you're going to end up being stuck at best, and at worst, you'll be stuck in something that is going to go away and then not have a skill worth having. So another risk that you might take is working on a production system for the first time. It might be, tempting to just say, I'm going to find somebody else to do it, or I just can't. And you have to, because that's your job. Now, is it okay for it to be scary? Absolutely it is. And just because it's scary for you doesn't mean that you are too risk averse. What means you're too risk averse is if you're just simply not able or willing to do these things because of it. So the opposite of being risk averse is being risk tolerant, or risk tolerance is what you're aiming for. Now, risk tolerance doesn't mean that you're going and, jumping your car over bridges or anything like that. It just means that you're willing to stop yourself when you get this fear and look at what you're doing and sort of, take an inventory of where you are and say, hey, I went to school for this, I know how to do this, I've done this in a sub-production system, and I can learn anything I want to because I've learned things in the past, and hey, if I'm not good at it at first, or even in the long run, it's not that big of a deal. So this is easier said than done, especially for certain personality types. It can be very difficult to get past that whole risk aversion because a lot of times we feel like we're being safe by being risk averse, and that feels good. Now, that being said, there are some risks that you shouldn't be taking, and there is such a thing as, being a loose cannon, and that would be sort of a different problem that would be covered by maybe a few of the other things we're going to talk about here in a second. So the next one is something that you've probably heard before, and that's dependency. Now, this just means that you're a person that tends to depend on others. And I'm not saying that it's bad to depend on others, because it's definitely not. In IT, you're always depending on others. But when you're depending on others for things you could otherwise do yourself, that's when you sort of have a problem. And that's because you've been hired to do a job and you should be the one doing it. Now, dependency often comes from being risk averse because you're afraid to take a risk, you find someone else to do it for you, and that can lead to dependency. But not always. Some people just realize that it would be easier to have someone else do it and go that route. The problem with that is it just means that you don't really have the skill set that you need when you need it. And it's especially bad in college because there are certain things that you won't be able to depend on people for. You may be able to find somebody to help you fix your program or do your homework for you. But when it comes time to take that test, they're not going to be able to do it for you. So it's not bad to ask for help, or even to rely on other people, especially if it makes sense to rely on them. But if you rely on other people, especially if it's just anyone you can find for something that you are supposed to be doing, that means you have a problem with being dependent. Now, the opposite of being dependent is having self-reliance. So self-reliance is a really good thing to have in IT because that means you are able to do the thing you're asked to do. And the thing about IT is it's always changing, so you're going to be asked to do things that you don't know how to do. Now, one potential downfall of being self-reliant is you might be tempted to say that you know something that you don't know, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But generally being self-reliant is good because you'll be seen as someone who can be asked to do a task and can figure it out on their own. Not to say it's ever bad to actually ask someone for help if you need help, but being more self-reliant is generally a good thing. Now, the next one is something that I have a particular problem with. and that's stress susceptibility. So I have a lot of problems with this myself. I rank myself very poorly on how susceptible to stress I am. Now, this can sometimes not seem like a bad thing because, hey, I'm stressed out, but I'm used to it. And I even used to say things like, well, the fact that I'm stressed all the time helps me because it means I'm worrying and I'm thinking about the things I need to be thinking about, and that's what makes me good at stuff. But I don't really think that that's the case, and it can hurt you in the long run in a lot of ways. This tends to be more of a problem in your career than it is in college, but it certainly hurts in college. One of the reasons it can be sort of okay in college is because it may be the only thing you have to be stressed out about, and you're young, so your body can take the stress better, and probably your mind as well. Although that's not always true. Stress in college can lead you to quite a few bad things if it gets too out of control. For me, it never did, but I was always stressed out all the time. And in my career, I'm stressed out a lot. I'm more stressed out than I should be. And the problem with being stress prone like this, with being susceptible to stress, is it becomes sort of a habit, and it takes its toll. It chips away at you little by little, and it can hurt you in everything that you do, especially if you find yourself kind of being stressed out all the time, because eventually you might look for ways to relieve that stress, and more often than not, those ways turn out to not be good. Now, there are ways to help you relieve stress, but if you're overstressed or you don't deal with stress well, that can just be something that harms you, because you're less apt to actually go for the good long-term fixes, and you're more apt to go for the quick release, the things that you shouldn't be doing, like substances that can relieve stress. Or maybe it could actually lead you into dependency in other ways in your life. And I guess substances could be one of those things. But in the end, it will leave you feeling burned out. And burnout is a real problem in this industry. That if you get burned out, it sort of just makes it hard for you to work at all. And that's something that tends to happen to me. It's not that I can't recover, but I can see how it hurts me. And it makes my life hard, and it makes my job harder. So the opposite of being stress susceptible is stress resistance. And unfortunately for me, this is something I have had trouble in my life finding. And it's something that when you have issues with these things, you will probably be working your whole life to get better at it. But the things I can say about stress resistance is it means you're willing to look at what you're worrying about and kind of gauge it and understand, should I be worrying about this? Is it helpful for me to be worrying about this, or should I forget about it for a while? And this can be hard to do for someone who's susceptible to stress like I am. Now, there are a few things that you can do to help you with this that I've learned, and one is to ask, what's the worst that could happen? And I do that sometimes now. And of course, if you're super stress susceptible, you can think of something. But if you're being realistic, it can help you to relax a little bit. Another thing is to maybe just not take things so seriously. So the next thing is avoidance. So avoidance is another way that you might deal with risk aversion, but it basically means if you feel uncomfortable with something, then you're going to try to avoid it at least for as long as possible. So yes, this is to you procrastinators out there, that is an avoidant behavior. You are avoiding doing the thing that makes you uncomfortable. The problem with this type of behavior is, in the end, you can't avoid these things, and you have to take them on. If you procrastinate and you wait until the last minute, you've actually just made it a lot worse on yourself. And this can be especially bad in college, because in college, if you procrastinate, especially in IT, you might not really know how hard or easy that assignment will be. Now, sometimes it might end up being a relief that, you gauged it to be kind of hard and it was sort of easy. But the inverse can be really bad, because you may have thought, well, this will be about, yay level difficulty, and it turns out to be a lot more, and there's no way you can get it done, and that's bad, right? It can also mean you put off studying when you should have started earlier. And the opposite of avoidance is engagement. So this is something that I have a hard time actually trying to, communicate to people of how do you stop procrastinating, right? How do you stop that avoidant behavior? And it can be quite hard. A lot of times it's a little at a time. and you just have to kind of ease yourself into things instead of jumping straight in. When you're just not comfortable doing that, there are ways to make yourself feel more comfortable when you do things, and they're going to be different for everyone, but sometimes it can be as simple as just taking 10 minutes and starting something and just promising yourself you're going to look at it for 10 minutes, and then you're going to go right back to whatever pleasurable activity you were doing before. And you can ease into that a little bit more by saying, okay, well, you know, I'll do 10 minutes this hour, and then I'll do 10 minutes the next hour. And if you just keep doing that, you're eventually going to be able to ease yourself in and hopefully start to change that behavioral pattern. But just like with everything else on this list, it's very hard. So the next thing on this list is egotism. So this sort of just barely makes the list because the thing is, you can go really far with your ego, and I hate to admit that, but it's true. And this is something I have had a bit of a bout of a struggle with here and there in my career, that it's easy to, you know, see your successes and start to think too highly of yourself. And you might think, well, why is this a problem? Well, in college, it might actually not be. It actually could help you to a certain degree, but when you get to your career, there's going to be a few pitfalls. And one is that it's going to make people not like you. And that's sort of an issue because in any workplace, you have to work with other people. And the biggest issue with this situation is with your ego, you're probably going to be walking around and not realizing it, you know, completely oblivious to the fact that people don't like the way that you behave. And that is, you know, something where you're kind of being blinded by your own thought process. Another reason it can be bad is if it comes crashing down, which inevitably you're going to have failures. And if you have failures, that's going to break your ego, and really, like, something that wouldn't have bothered someone that much, that can, you know, lead to a crisis if you have an ego. And, you know, one thing to keep in mind is thinking, hey, I did good at something, I'm successful, confident. Being confident is not the same as being egotistical. The real difference comes when you take your confidence basically and you project that out onto other people and start kind of gauging yourself against other people or thinking that you're superior to them because of your successes. Now, these thoughts, you know, come in the line of, well, you know, if everyone else was just like me, everything would be better, right? These are thoughts that come with egotism, and they're thoughts that I and probably a lot of you have had. There's nothing wrong with having an ego. Obviously, we all have one. It's part of your psyche. But if you let it become too big of a part of your personality, it's gonna, you know, not only lead to you having a negative career at some point, but it can lead to you having a bad life. And the worst part about it is that if you're egotistical enough, you may be completely oblivious to that, which you could argue, I guess, isn't bad, but it is, and it's something that you want to avoid. So what's the opposite of egotism? Well, that would be humility. So humility kind of elaborates on why egotism can be so bad for you. Because if you have humility, then you accept your victories with the people you work with, not as an individual and try to put yourself up on a pedestal. You have to remember that your career is not just a way to make money. It's what you're going to be doing most of the time. It's going to be, you know, probably 9 to 5, 5 days out of the week, which is only 7 days. You're going to be spending your life doing this. And if you miss out on that camaraderie and those feelings that come with humility, you're really robbing yourself in an entire piece of your career, and you might be able to get through all the way being very egotistical, but you're still really missing out on something. So that's my list, guys. I really want to, I don't think I can state strongly enough that if you exhibit some of these qualities, that does not mean you're not cut out to do IT. It doesn't mean you're a bad fit. In fact, I'd say that I have to some extent experienced, you know, some of these tendencies. And that's because they're all part of human behavior. It's only when it becomes a big part of your personality does it become a problem. And like I was saying before, if one of these or two of these or even more are a big part of your personality, that doesn't mean you're not cut out for IT either. You know, everybody has a thing that hurts them. And it's more about recognizing what that is and trying to do, take actions, take steps to, mitigate that. Find ways to make it not so bad. And accept yourself as a person at some point. Understand what your weaknesses are. These are things that just being knowledgeable about them will help you to be a better person and help you to have a better career. Okay, so I hope this video helps somebody. I hope I'm not trying to, scare you. I hope that's not how it comes across. And if you like this stuff, please subscribe to this channel. Guys, I'm really close to 1,000 subscribers, and I know that's not that many, that's not a big deal, but for someone like me that, I work a full-time job, I'm doing a master's degree, this is not my full-time thing. This is not what I think about and do all day. This is just kind of a hobby for me. So for me, it's kind of meaningful to reach that number. And if you don't feel like subscribing, please at least give this video a like. Have a good night.